Coincidental.
Chapter 4: Christianity, Secularity, and Secularism. Whatever the nature of its ingredients, and regardless of its ambiguous purposes, the recent turn to religion in America has shown that religion and secularity cannot be separated. The unsophisticated masses have, through the crudeness of their religious gratifications, given a more real indication of how religion can speak to the present age than theologians or traditions have been able to exhibit. Such groping need not be inauthentic for being rudimentary. However superficial, however self-centered or hedonistic, this outburst of religiosity must be acknowledged within its limitations as a valid groping for an ultimate meaning. Regardless of the motive, the consciousness of a vacuous life is a sign of life affirmation, or at least that the life more abundant is a possibility. Religiosity bears witness to this, and doubtless to the fact that the meaning of existence is a part of the reality of this world. Conversely, the religious upsurge of the 1950s made it clear that the reality of the world is given with the fact of religious existence. This, when all the criticism has been piled up and sifted, may be a decisive gain. Should Christianity survive, it will have profited by the lesson. Secularity as a Christian obligation. To claim that faith is inseparable from secularity is not an innovation, nor is it a reversal of the Christian tradition. It is a renewal, a reaffirmation of the biblical doctrine about the nature of this world and the meaning of the believer's presence in it. Essentially, the Bible is not otherworldly in its assessment of religious existence. This interpretation fits the Old Testament more adequately than it does the New, but it does not violate the spirit of the New Testament, especially if one is to regard it as the fulfillment, not the negation, of the Old Testament, and one must do this according to the Christian tradition itself. The Old Testament considers the world as God's creation and asserts that this creation was originally good, despite the fact that it also states, through the myth of the fall, that this goodness can be corrupted. Biblical thought considers the world as man's sphere of action and preeminence. Man's responsibility to God and his involvement in the world emerge as polar elements attesting to the original goodness of creation. This polarity never obliterates the possibility that the goodness on which it rests may become self-centered or introverted. The locus of the polarity is at the same time a locus of tension. There is no dichotomy between man's responsibility to God and his involvement in the world, although there is a clear distinction. This distinction does not call for either man's withdrawal from the world or a separation between his religious obligations and his secular tasks. One finds in the Bible an implicit distinction between religious and secular, but the distinction does not involve a radical split between these two spheres. They are distinguished but not split or severed from each other. They complement each other in such a way that, as Martin Buber has said, the secular is not merely secular, but it is not yet holy. The distinction is between the religious and the not yet religious, or the holy and the not yet holy. Because Christianity conceives of itself as the new Israel, the whole of the New Testament must be regarded in the light of the preceding argument, including those passages which seem otherworldly almost unmistakably. It is beyond the scope of this book to develop the various reasons for making such an assertion. Briefly, however, all religious language is essentially symbolic and not literal, much as fundamentalists and orthodox of all kinds would like it. And to say that it is symbolic implies that allowance is made for the idiosyncrasy of the culture and the class of people in whose language the religious truths are apprehended and expressed. For this reason, the various utterances of the New Testament, which are spelled out in otherworldly terms, must be interpreted in light of the implicit coincidence between these terms and the fundamental concepts of the Old Testament to which they essentially refer. In other words, these otherworldly terms are themselves symbolic reinterpretation of the ancient biblical insight, according to which man's involvement in the world, though not severed from his commitment to God, must not be mistaken for this unconditional commitment. In the biblical understanding of man's place in the universe, faith, trust in God, and secularity could not be cleft from one another. This is what modern man has possibly discovered in the very ambiguities of his rather lowbrow religious search. There is no self-evident reason for denying him this, even though the supposed discovery is itself a benevolent and optimistic conjecture. Historians have either accused Protestantism of causing the loss of the biblical understanding of the reality of man and of the world, or they have praised Protestantism for the affinity it has had with the spiritual, intrinsic worth of the world as the secular theater of God's glory. Protestantism occupies a controverted place in the history of the Christian tradition concerning the biblical emphasis on the necessary relation between faith and secularity. This can be studied from two angles. The first is the ecclesiastical phenomenon of routine, if monstrous proportions, the repercussions of which have altered the course of Western history and culture, the sale of indulgences and Luther's reaction to it. The second angle is the Protestant understanding of human destiny and the spiritual quality of all human vocations, be they religious or secular, in the context of the culture impregnated by the Christian tradition. Usually historians, both Protestant and Roman Catholic, have appraised the widespread sale of indulgences as a miscarriage of proper papal and hierarchical functions. The vulgarity of this pseudo-spiritual mercantilism cannot be defended from any point of view, even from the theory on which it was originally based. That theory dealt with the so-called treasury of merits, according to which the saints had earned more merits than they personally needed to go to heaven. It was thought that the surplus thus accumulated constituted a treasury from which the church could draw in order to help a deficient soul attain its goal. By the 16th century, instead of freely dispensing these merits according to individual needs, the Pope was selling them at what was purported to be only a nominal price. What irritated Luther at first was the greed, papal or otherwise, barely concealed, if not openly displayed, by such a commercial handling of salvation and the means of grace. But the result of Luther's initial revulsion was a completely different understanding of redemption and the signs of an authentically Christian existence. The sale of indulgences affected only the afterlife, and the Christian theory of redemption tended to assume more and more pronounced otherworldly connotations. Luther reversed this trend and assessed the validity of new being experienced by man through redemption in terms of its relevance to his contemporary situation. The focus was shifted from the life after death to the life here on earth. So far as Luther was concerned, no indulgence could be bought that would appease his conscience and alleviate his anguish here and now. That is the meaning of his theory about justification by faith, according to which God alone is he who saves. And if he does so, he does it here and now. And that is why Luther had to broaden the medieval concept of vocation, which then applied only to the priestly office, to include all stations in life, whether lay or clerical. Luther's conception of vocation, though broadened, was nevertheless static. This is shown by the Lutheran development of private and public norms of ethics and the subsequent division between the sphere of the church and that of the secular government. While such a resuscitation of the old dualism of sacred and secular is contrary to the spirit of Luther's theory of vocation, it is present in his basic distinction between the person and his public office. Luther argued that a prince must govern qua prince and not qua Christian. The inertia of many Lutherans in the early days of Nazism was due to this factor. It was Calvin who recast the doctrine of vocation in conspicuously dynamic terms. His theory differs fundamentally from Luther's, and ipso facto from that of the Middle Ages. It holds that the Christian man must serve God, not only in the vocation that happens to be his, which means in spite of his earthly vocation, but he must especially serve God through his vocation. Whatever it may be, it is suitable for the glorification of God. Not only the minister properly glorifies God, but also the civil servant or the politician. No cleavage subsists here between a sacred duty and a secular one, between private and public morality. Given this premise, it is no longer possible to distinguish, except academically, the spiritual nature of man's commitment to God from the practical sphere of his actions and his involvement in the world. That is why Protestantism calls for secularity. But it does not call for secularism, in which it has often resulted. By secularity is meant the sphere of man's action. This means temporality in contrast to the divine eternity, and it means finitude in contrast to God's infinitude. Secularity refers to the ensemble of man's activity as well as his creativity, all of which reflect the biblical fact that man is created in the image of God, but is not divine per se. Secularity also refers to the cultural manifestations of man's self-apprehension as a creature of God. Cultural manifestations include not only what is obviously such, for example, art forms, but also ecclesiastical, theological, creedal, or liturgical forms. There is no reason why the latter should not be considered in the same cultural category as the former. This is a reflection of the biblical insistence to steer clear both of dualism and of monism, respectively, the separation and confusion of sacred and secular. For the Bible, there is only one valid distinction, the holy and the not yet holy. Once these characteristics have been understood, it is easy to distinguish secularity from secularism. While the former is that realm in which religion can show its relevance, the latter is an inverted and concealed religious attitude. Secularism is a form of religiosity, for which the present and the immanent are invested with the attributes of the eternal and the transcendent. It is an expropriation of religion, not for the sake of shaking off the tyranny of its supernaturalism, as it is claimed, but really for the sake of another mystique and another fundamentalism or fanaticism. Few attitudes are more religious than those of certain secularists, who have deified democracy or sex or the classless society. Protestantism and, indeed, biblical thought are not compatible with secularism. This would contradict the basic understanding of man's nature as a creature created in the image of God. And it would contradict the original biblical view according to which one's faith in God and involvement in the world, or secularity, belong together. These two are united and can be separated only at the expense of one kind of fanaticism or another. Modern religiosity looks like a curious mixture of Christianity, secularity, and secularism. The composition which results from these ingredients is rather amorphous, but it cannot be dismissed as being utterly artificial. No human situation ever is. One thing, however, is certain. The allegiance between religion and the world is ambiguous. One is not sure whether the revival has brought about a fresher understanding of religion in relation to the secular world, or whether it has intensified and sanctioned an ill-disguised secularism. Some critics have wondered how it is possible to have a revival at all in the midst of an ever-growing and tangible secularism. These critics doubt that there has been a revival in any form or shape, except as a means of self-gratification, and chances are that this judgment is close to reality. But there is another side, in the fact that modern religion, more self-consciously than ever before, has persisted in refusing to disassociate spiritual matters from secular realities. Faith in God has been extolled as a means toward wealth and success and toward economic and psychic stability. Faith in success and stability have often been literally equated. Perhaps the materialistic equation that has been vulgarized and disseminated is a reaction against the unbiblical otherworldliness by which Christianity has long characterized itself. This is a generous appraisal of the situation. In the main, emphasis has been on the pure and simple equation of faith and material realities. Secular motives needed to be sanctified because men will not forgo the goods that go with them. And why should they, unless it be for a clearly ultimate reason, which apparently is lacking? Beyond the so-called secularism of contemporary religiosity, it is the lack of such an ultimate reason which needs examination. That, more than anything else, is the stumbling block of Christianity today. Material goods are not blameworthy per se. In many lands where the economy is poor, Christian leaders have often construed the task of Christianity as one designed to alleviate the suffering of the disinherited. No one can object to that. But there is a difference between people who are materially disinherited and those who are disinherited spiritually and seek alleviation through material means. Their spiritual poverty may well have resulted from an incapacity to endow material goods with a spiritual meaning. But they seek a way out, and no matter in what way they look, at least they seek. It would be arrogant to dismiss even this kind of quest. The religious revival as secularism. Christian thought as a whole has never conceived the world as a place to be abandoned to itself, but as an instrument of God's glorification. From St. Augustine on, this concept has consistently appeared in the history of theology. Augustine's vision of the city of God was his way of defining the possibilities of this world as a means intended for the glorification of God. And the classic expression of this view was formulated by Calvin's understanding of the world as the theater of God's glory. On the other hand, the biblical tradition has generally maintained that man is created in the image of God, but in such a way that God nonetheless remains imageless. God is not the sum total or the result of man's imagination. There is always a qualitative difference between God and man, as intimate as it is infinite. Similarly, man is to exert dominion over the other creatures and things of this world, but he must eat his bread by the sweat of his brow. All this suggests that the symmetry between man's obligation to God and his obligation to the world is never construed in biblical thought as though it implied some cosmic harmony. This, from the point of view of the Bible, is where the Greeks erred. For the idea of a cosmic harmony necessarily leads to the doctrine of ataraxia, as it did when the obvious and inescapable disturbance of life shook up the belief in a well-ordered universe. Ataraxia meant freedom from passion, i.e. from soul sickness, and why not say it, it meant mental health. Despite all the mental health strains of the modern revival, and despite all the evidences of a cult of reassurance it presented in profusion, today's turn to religion does not entail any abnegation of material goods and values or of secular achievements. Certainly, Norman Vincent Peale's version of Christianity does not call for a rejection of all secular abundance. Quite the contrary. Material triumphs are part of the modern gospel. Whatever else it was, the revival of interest in religion was neither Montanist nor Albigensian. It did not proclaim any radical withdrawal from the world. It sought to attune, if not accommodate, the harassed conscience of modern man to the worldly exigencies of his situation. After all, was this revival not preceded by the social gospel movement and the secularization of millenarianism? Surely it must have benefited from both of them. The acceptance of the world fostered by the present religious climate emanates from a quest for harmonious consistency, from a nostalgia for the Golden Age. Its understanding of the reality of the world rests on another principle, i.e. the speculative harmony of an immanently conceived cosmos, than that of the biblical understanding, i.e. the world as God's creation, and the sphere of man's commitment to him despite incoherence, adversity, and evil. The present acceptance of the world, and the concomitant attempt to cope with the spiritual problems this acceptance involves, are begotten and shaped by a worldview fundamentally different from the Christian. The more Christianity has transformed the world and made it more habitable, the more it has been unable to cope with it. A well-ordered garden no longer offers the same challenge as an uncultivated plot of land. No doubt the world still offers a challenge, but it is of a different sort, and it may take time to find it. Once found, it may call for an approach to reality other than the one customarily prescribed by Christianity. The relevance of Christianity is being questioned, at least by implication, and Christianity is losing what relevance it had in the past. The conquest of nature may leave man with a certain feeling of wondrous triumph, but it is bound to be different from his previous wonder about its mysteries. Man may have thanked God for all the sorts of natural resources, but technological mastery is bound to effect in man a different relation, or the absence of a relation, to God. These characteristics give a strange appearance to the religion that has recently been revived. The strangest characteristic is that it has no historically recognizable identity. The religious revival did not insert itself in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It was anonymous. It did not reinvigorate the contemporaneousness of the Christian message, or of the Jewish for that matter, even if at many points it harked back to the past and the faith of our fathers. A transplantation is not a revival, especially if the soil no longer agrees with what is being transplanted. Atavism is neither growth nor strength. At best, it can display the appeal of magic, but this is neither faith nor commitment. It is escape. There are 3 reasons for making these statements. The first and most obvious is the non-denominational popularity of the various leaders of the revival. Whether this is salutary or not depends on one's perspective. Some argue that the absence of religious partisanship is a good thing. Even if this is admitted, the fact itself is important only in the light of motivation. And who can tell what a sound motivation is? How is one to determine the content of an intention, of an act? From a religious angle, the objectivity of an action is even more precarious or hypothetical, and may be safer to assume that the disappearance of denominational rigidity was not due to any kind of ecumenical maturity as much as to a loss of confessional consciousness. This loss reflects the general deliquescence of the Christian faith. It is equally a manifestation of the entertainment value of the revival and their leaders. Protestants watched Roman Catholic Bishop Sheen on television, and Catholics had to be forbidden to attend Billy Graham's crusade in New York. The second reason is closely connected with the first. Religiosity in general, rather than the churches, was the chief beneficiary of the revival. Christianity, while it has contributed much to Western culture, is now unable to speak to it, nor can it profit from the crisis of conscience through which modern man gropes for his soul. It is this religiosity more than any ecumenical maturity which enables interdenominational and non-denominational participation in religious mass events. Though it has been a long time since Christians were thrown to the lions, the principle has varied rather little. Panem et circenses has become religionem et circenses. What else can a rich country ask for instead of bread? This is the irony of the time and the strange fate of Christianity. Christianity is swallowed up by the riches it has produced. When Jesus remarked that it would be more difficult for a rich man to go to heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, perhaps he meant that religiosity, rather than riches, would constitute a serious obstacle, and that it should accordingly be difficult for a rich man to be a Christian. The problem has remained practically the same since the days of Kierkegaard. As he saw it, the main philosophical, or rather practical and existential problem was how to become a Christian. The acuteness of this problem was sharpened by the fact that not only Hegel's predominant system, but also Christianity itself as an organization and a sclerotic mode of being was antithetical to the possibility of becoming a Christian. Kierkegaard did not consider the problem of becoming a Christian as an adoption of one particular theory of beliefs or type of philosophical system instead of another. He regarded it as a singular mode of being in relation to God and to one's fellow men as well as to oneself. He understood this mode of being as pointing to the task of realizing in one's life the paradox of man's proximity to and his utter dereliction from God. This is what the biblical concept of God is about. Religious existence is theonomous existence, but the authenticity of religious existence is tested not only by its fruit, but also by its roots. For biblical thought, the root of authentic religious existence is God. The business of being a Christian depends in a large measure on one's conception of God. This is not merely a matter of academic sophistication, but equally of practical relevance. The last reason has to do with the various conceptions of God found in the pamphlet literature and other utterances through which this religiosity seeks to appeal to the masses. Modern man is not so much intent on inventing God, in case he does not exist, as he is on inventing concepts which, considering that they are only substitutes, are doing God's job as best they can. Some of these concepts are plainly weird. God is referred to as a co-pilot or a porter. Sometimes he is conceived as a cosmic pal, but all the time he is the nicest fellow one can ever dream of meeting. All those concepts have a common denominator. They are all anthropomorphic, and they all originate in the inflationary imagination of sentimentalism. But whatever the theological or philosophical connotations may be, this anthropomorphism means that men worship the God they deserve. Men create God in their image. Their concepts of God represent but a hypertrophy of their self-understanding, and sometimes a Pharisaic or moralistic sanction of their aspirations. Man's understanding of the deity is dependent on his highest values, and these are often created by his environment. God becomes no more than an ideal man. Such a devaluation of God is not the monopoly of popular religion only. Nor is this negative appraisal merely the mark of a pessimistic approach to the complexities of human nature and its religious proclivities. It is corroborated in many modern novels. Studying some of these in A Mirror of the Ministry in Modern Novels, Horton Davies conducts his analysis in terms of 5 categories which also underlie the chronological development since Hawthorne. The problem that recurs in each of these categories is that of the relation between Christianity and culture. These 2 spheres, at the time of Hawthorne, are related and interdependent. Afterward, religion and culture go their separate ways, and the correlation of faith, knowledge, and science constitutes the next problem in a series of clerical portraits described as divines in doubt. Subsequently, the priests of Bernanos, Mauriac, and Green provide the sacerdotal approach to the problem. In the dilemma between religion and culture, these priests are not much concerned about sacramental or liturgical obligations. The next category is that of the age of global expansion during the 19th century. Ironically, the novel of or about this period did not provide any estimable character. Everyone remembers Sadie Thompson. The last category is devoted to the present-day minister as community leader, wherever he has not been displaced by the psychiatrist, and where specialization, the mark of the age, permits. Davies' book shows the unheroic worldliness of religion mistaken for a theonomous acceptance of the world. If it is not worldliness, then it is religion taking refuge in either sacramentalism or asceticism. As James Street said, religion is nothing except humanity. It is the kind of humanity which is depicted by Black Wolf and Sinclair Lewis's The God-Seeker, which Davies cites. Black Wolf is an Oberlin-educated Indian who gives his view of Christianity in these words. Most of the whites believe, or profess to believe in Christianity, which is an idolatrous religion with many gods. Their Catholic sect has thousands of mysterious divine beings ruled by what they call the Trinity, which consists of Father, Son, and Mother Mary. The Protestants have no Trinity, but a 4-God council consisting of Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and Satan. Among their demigods are Santa Claus, Luck, whom they worship by striking wood, saints, angels, seraphs, witches, fairies, vampires, evil spirits, the spirits of the dead, tombs and statues, the cross, and a magic book called the Bible. To be sure, glibness about this matter may show mere smartness. It is not necessarily enlightening. This is a religious problem par excellence, since man everywhere is limited by the very words through which he seeks to transcend his limitations. In the Bible itself, God is referred to as a shield, as the one who is mighty in battle, and teaches the soldier's hand into war. He is paternal, even maternal, a shepherd, a friend, a bridegroom, a husband. Why is it, then, that the modern ways in which popular religiosity designates God make one shudder? What is wrong with designations for God as a porter or the man upstairs? Why are such expressions more objectionable than certain biblical ones which are no less down to earth and just as fragile? It is not the modern phrase which can or must be objected to, so much as the understanding it expresses of the self and its relation to other selves and the world, and to God. By contrast with the biblical instances, these modern popular appellations suggest that the deity is a missing link in man's unsuccessful attempts to grasp the meaning of his self and of the world. The deity becomes just a global hypothesis, a mere cog of an intricate machine, whether friendly or formidable. Thus, the conception of God as the cosmic pal is but another step in the development of universal anthropocentrism, away from the original theocentrism of the Bible.